Gordon Ryan versus Felipe Pena. If there's one rivalry that defines modern jiu-jitsu, it's Gordon Ryan versus Felipe Pena. No other feud has had this much history, this much drama, and this much personal tension. The bad blood between them goes far beyond competition results. It's not just about medals, it's about pride, legacy, and two completely different personalities clashing at every turn. Their story begins back in 2016 at Studio 540. Gordon was already being talked about as the future of grappling, a young athlete with enormous hype coming out of the Danaher Death Squad. He had the confidence and the game to back it up, but when he faced Felipe Pena, the more seasoned competitor, he got humbled. Pena choked him out, making a clear statement that Gordon still had levels to climb. That wasn't just a loss, it was a reality check, and it planted the seed for everything that came next. Later that same year, they met again, this time on the biggest stage possible. At ADCC 2017, Gordon came in with momentum, but Pena once again showed that he had his number. He beat Gordon by points in the open weight and proved it wasn't a fluke. That second loss stung worse than the first. Gordon had now lost twice to the same man in his breakout year, and Felipe Pena became the one person who could legitimately say he had figured him out. For Gordon, who prides himself on solving everyone's game and leaving no doubts, that was unacceptable. The years that followed only deepened the tension. Gordon kept rising, winning ADCC titles, dominating the sport like nobody before him. Every match looked like a mismatch. Every opponent seemed like a stepping stone, but no matter how many people Gordon crushed, the shadow of Felipe Pena was always there. In interviews, Gordon would talk about being the best ever, but critics always fired back with questions like, what about Pena? By 2022, the anticipation for a third match was enormous. Fans called it the biggest super fight in grappling history. The rules were no time limit, submission only, no points, no advantages, no referees to argue about, just two men fighting until one couldn't continue. It was the perfect setup to finally settle the score. The hype was massive, but the match itself turned out to be lopsided. Gordon Ryan dominated every position, smothered Pena with pressure, and attacked relentlessly. After more than 30 minutes, Pena quit mid-match, citing the emotional toll of losing his close friend Leandro Lo just weeks earlier. Instead of bringing closure, that outcome only added gasoline to the fire. Gordon celebrated like he had erased the rivalry, mocking Pena publicly and calling him a quitter. Pena fired back, saying Gordon lacked respect, lacked empathy, and that the win didn't prove what Gordon thought it did. Instead of ending the feud, it only made it more toxic. Fans split into camps. Gordon's supporters said he had broken Pena both physically and mentally. Pena's fans argued that circumstances, grief, and exhaustion played a role, and that Gordon would never erase those two early losses. What makes this rivalry so compelling isn't just the matches, but the personalities. Gordon leans fully into being the villain. He brags about steroids, calls himself the king of jiu-jitsu, and trashes anyone who disagrees with him. He thrives on being hated. Pena, in contrast, positions himself as the humble warrior. He points to the times he actually beat Gordon, frames himself as someone with respect for the art, and paints Gordon as a bully who disrespects everyone around him. Even today, the trash talk hasn't stopped. Gordon regularly posts about Pena, mocking his excuses and daring him to come back for another match. Pena still insists he's the one man Gordon couldn't truly conquer. Some fans believe Pena remains Gordon's kryptonite, the rival who scarred him early in his career. Others believe Gordon already broke him in their third fight and that the rivalry is over. But whatever side you fall on, one thing is certain. No rivalry in modern jiu-jitsu has been this heated, this personal, and this unforgettable. Eddie Bravo versus Royler Gracie. Few rivalries in jiu-jitsu history shook the foundations of the sport quite like Eddie Bravo versus Royler Gracie. This wasn't just a clash of two athletes, it was a collision of philosophies and generation. On one side stood Royler, a decorated IBJJF world champion, and a proud representative of the most famous family in grappling. On the other side was Eddie, a brash, unorthodox American who came out of nowhere, armed with creativity, belief in his system, and a chip on his shoulder. Their story begins at ADCC 2003. Royler was one of the favorites in his division, respected for his technical mastery and connection to the Gracie dynasty. Eddie was virtually unknown outside the United States. He had talent, but he didn't have the medals or the name recognition yet. For most fans, this matchup looked like a formality. Royler was expected to win and move on, and Eddie was seen as another early round opponent. But that's not what happened. Eddie fought with the kind of confidence you don't often see from an underdog. He attacked, he pushed the pace, and when the opportunity came, he locked Royler into a triangle choke that shocked the entire grappling world. Royler tapped, and in that moment, Eddie Bravo went from unknown to legend. Commentators couldn't believe it. An outsider with no Gracie bloodline had just submitted one of the most respected Gracies alive on the biggest stage in grappling. That single victory sent shockwaves through the jiu-jitsu community. For some, it was the ultimate underdog story and proof that innovation could beat tradition. For others, especially loyalists to the Gracie family, it was an embarrassment, a moment they wanted to dismiss or downplay. But the truth was undeniable. Eddie Bravo had arrived, and he had done it by toppling royalty. The rivalry didn't end there, though. Eddie used that win as the launching pad for his vision of jiu-jitsu. Instead of chasing medals in traditional competitions, he built his own gym named 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu Jiu-Jitsu, which rejected the gi entirely and embraced no-gi submission grappling. His creations, like the rubber guard and the twister, became part of his identity as an innovator, and every time people doubted him, he could point back to ADCC 2003 and say, "I beat a Gracie." That victory wasn't just a moment in his career. It was the proof of concept for his entire philosophy. Years later, in 2014, the rivalry was reignited. Metamoris announced a rematch between Eddie Bravo and Royler Gracie. This time, the stakes were different. Eddie wasn't the underdog anymore. Royler, though older and past his prime, still carried the weight of his name and the respect of tradition. The match was set up as more than just a rematch. It was framed as tradition versus innovation, old school versus new school, Gracie versus outsider. For 20 minutes, the two battled in a match that had fans glued to their screens. Eddie controlled much of the action, repeatedly threatening with his unique system with lockdown sweeps and deep submission attempts. Royler defended bravely, refusing to tap, but it was clear that Eddie had proven his point again. The Gracie family's representative couldn't impose his will, and Eddie's unorthodox system had shown itself to be legitimate against one of the most respected names in the sport. The aftermath of the rematch cemented the rivalry's legacy. Royler walked away with his reputation intact, never tapping and showing resilience, but Eddie walked away with validation. The 10th Planet system wasn't just a gimmick. It worked, even against the best of the Gracies. For Eddie's supporters, it was the ultimate vindication. For his critics, it was another reminder that the sport was changing whether they liked it or not. What makes Eddie Bravo versus Royler Gracie such a legendary rivalry isn't just the matches themselves, but what they represented. It was a turning point in jiu-jitsu history. Royler embodied the traditional kimono philosophy that had dominated for decades. Eddie represented creativity, rebellion, and the birth of a new era in submission grappling. One match ended in a shocking upset, the other in a 20-minute showcase of innovation versus tradition. Together, they told the story of how jiu-jitsu evolved in the modern era. B-Team versus New Wave. If Eddie Bravo versus Royler Gracie was the rivalry that split jiu-jitsu into old school and new school, then B-Team versus New Wave is the rivalry that split fans right down the middle. This isn't just about athletes competing against each other. It's about friendships breaking apart, egos clashing, and two different visions of how the sport should move forward. The story starts with the Danaher Death Squad, the most dominant team of the 2010s. Under the guidance of John Danaher, the group of Gordon Ryan, Gary Tonin, Craig Jones, Nicky Rodriguez, Nicky Ryan, and Ethan Krellinston rewrote the playbook on submission grappling. Their leg lock system, positional control, and strategic approach made them almost untouchable. For years, they trained together in New York, building a mystique as both innovators and killers on the mats. But success often brings fractures. By 2021, tension within the squad had reached a breaking point. Rumors swirled about clashing egos, money disputes, and conflicting goals. Then the bombshell dropped. The team was officially splitting. Gordon Ryan, John Danaher, and Gary Tonin left to form New Wave Jiu-Jitsu in Austin, Texas, while Craig Jones, Nicky Rodriguez, Nicky Ryan, and Ethan Krellinston launched their own camp just down the road, which they called B-Team. From the moment of the split, the rivalry wrote itself. New Wave positioned itself as the structured elite machine, led by the greatest grappler alive in Gordon Ryan and the most influential coach in John Danaher. They leaned into their identity as the pinnacle of professionalism and dominance. B-Team, on the other hand, branded themselves as the rebel. They made memes, poked fun at Gordon's seriousness, and built their following on charisma as much as competition. It wasn't just two gyms, it was two cultures. The rivalry quickly spilled over into competition. Nicky Rodriguez became Gordon Ryan's most outspoken critic, accusing him of using PEDs and even suggesting that Gordon greased during matches to avoid submissions. Gordon fired back online, calling Nicky Rod disloyal and mocking his skills. Craig Jones added fuel with his trademark humor, constantly trolling New Wave on social media and turning the rivalry into entertainment that fans ate up. Every time an athlete from one team faced the other, the atmosphere felt charged, as if every match carried the weight of the split itself. The biggest showdown came at the Craig Jones Invitational, when B-Team and New Wave met in a $1 million team competition. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the storyline couldn't have been better. After a string of tense matches, it all came down to Nick Rodriguez, who delivered a dominant performance in overtime to secure the victory for B-Team. The celebration was massive, and for many fans, it felt like a symbolic win and proof that B-Team wasn't just the leftovers, but a legitimate powerhouse in their own right. What makes this rivalry so fascinating is that it still feels personal. These weren't just teammates. They were training partners who lived and trained together for years. Some see Gordon and New Wave as the untouchable standard. Others root for Craig and B-Team as the underdogs with heart and humor. At its core, B-Team versus New Wave is more than just athletes competing. It's a story about identity. New Wave represents precision, structure, and dominance. B-Team represents rebellion, personality, and freedom. Together, they've created the most entertaining team rivalry jiu-jitsu has ever seen, and one that still feels far from finished. Mica Galvao versus Ruotolo. Mica Galvao versus Taya Ruotolo is the rivalry that could shape the future of jiu-jitsu. These two aren't just competitors, they represent the new generation, a wave of athletes who grew up on the mats and hit the black belt scene as teenagers, already carrying the weight of massive expectations. Mica's rise was meteoric. Born into a grappling family in Manaus, Brazil, he was molded by his father since childhood and was competing against black belts while most kids his age were still learning basic drills. By 18, he made history as the youngest ibjjf black belt world champion. Fans saw him as a prodigy, someone who combined the sharp technique of old-school jiu-jitsu with the athleticism and pace of the modern game. But almost as quickly as he rose, controversy hit. In 2023, just months after his world title, Mica tested positive for steroid use. The ibjjf stripped him of his medal, and overnight, his image shifted. For many, he went from the golden boy of the sport to a symbol of how deep doping ran in grappling. Tai Ruotolo's story couldn't be more different. Along with his twin brother Cade, he built his reputation on relentless pace, aggression, and a clean image. From a young age, the Ruotolos were known for their creativity, their energy, and their refusal to stall. By the time Tai hit the big stage, fans already saw him as one of the most exciting competitors alive. His style is pure chaos with constant scrambles, constant pressure, and a willingness to attack from everywhere. Where Mica's career became clouded by questions, Tai's was built on authenticity, fire, and positivity. When these two meet, it's more than just another match. It's a clash of narratives. Mica represents unbelievable skill and talent, but with an asterisk hanging over his name because of the steroid scandal. Tai represents the clean, fiery future of jiu-jitsu, a competitor fans want to root for because of how he fights and how he carries himself. Their matches are technical, fast-paced, and filled with the kind of energy that makes people feel like they're watching the next era unfold in real time. Fans see it as a rivalry of image as much as skill. Supporters of Mica argue that his talent is undeniable, that one mistake shouldn't erase the fact he's one of the best of his generation. Critics say his career will always be stained, and every win will be questioned. On the other side, Tai has built goodwill by competing clean, fighting aggressively, and earning respect without controversy. For his fans, he's the rightful ambassador of the sport, and the kind of athlete jiu-jitsu needs if it wants to keep growing worldwide. What makes this rivalry so intriguing is that it's still in its early stages. Both of them are young, both are already elite, and both could easily dominate the sport for the next decade. Every time they face off, it's not just about who wins on the mat, it's about who carries the torch into the future. Is it Mica, the prodigy fighting to rebuild his reputation? Or is it Tai, the relentless scrambler who feels like a breath of fresh air for the sport? Andre Galvao versus Gordon Ryan. If you want to talk about a rivalry that symbolized a passing of the torch in jiu-jitsu, it has to be Andre Galvao versus Gordon Ryan. This wasn't just two athletes competing, it was the face of one era colliding with the face of the next. Galvao represented the old guard of ADCC. Gordon was the brash newcomer who was loud, unapologetic, and determined to claim the throne. Their rivalry wasn't born on the mats, it was born in the years leading up to their showdown, and it boiled with tension long before they ever locked hands. Galvao's legacy speaks for itself. Multiple-time IBJJF world champion and a multiple-time ADCC champion. And the leader of Atos Jiu-Jitsu, he built a dynasty both as an athlete and a coach. For nearly a decade, Galvao held the ADCC Superfight title, beating legends like Braulio Estima and Claudio Callasens. He wasn't just winning, he was defending his crown year after year, establishing himself as the man everyone had to go through to prove themselves. Then came Gordon Ryan. By the late 2010s, Gordon had already carved out his reputation as the best no-GI grappler in the world. He tore through ADCC divisions, dismantled world-class opponents, and made dominance look easy. But Gordon wasn't satisfied with just being seen as the best. He wanted to dethrone Galvao directly. In interview after interview, on post after post, Gordon mocked Galvao's legacy, calling him overrated, outdated, and insisting that his time at the top was finished. The trash talk grew louder with each year, and fans could feel the rivalry building long before a match was even announced. The tension finally exploded in 2022 at ADCC. Backstage, before their scheduled super fight, the two had a heated confrontation that turned physical. Gordon slapped Galvao across the face in front of cameras. That moment instantly went viral, setting the stage for one of the most anticipated matches in submission grappling history. The rivalry had gone from words to action, and fans were buzzing to see how it would end. When they finally stepped onto the mats, it was clear that this wasn't just another match. It was the culmination of years of build-up. Galvao carried the weight of his dynasty and the respect of the old guard. Gordon carried the hype, the controversy, and the claim that he was already the greatest. From the opening exchange, Gordon imposed his game plan. He passed Galvao's guard, mounted him, and smothered him with relentless control. The ending came when Gordon took his back and choked him, securing a submission that symbolized more than just a victory. It was a a statement. The old king had been dethroned, and a new one had taken his place. For Gordon, the win cemented his claim as the undisputed best grappler of all time. For Galvao, it was the closing chapter of one of the greatest careers the sport has ever seen. But beyond the result, the rivalry mattered because of what it represented. Galvao embodied professionalism, discipline, and the traditional path of building a legacy through years of consistency. Gordon embodied chaos, trash talk, and overwhelming dominance. Their clash wasn't just about two men. It was about two different visions of greatness colliding on the biggest stage in grappling. In the end, Gordon Ryan versus Andre Galvao wasn't a rivalry built on a series of matches. It was built on pride, tension, and the inevitability of eras changing hands. For fans, it will always be remembered as the night the torch officially passed, when the dynasty of Galvao gave way to the reign of Gordon Ryan. Cobrinha versus Rafa Mendes. Among all the rivalries in jiu-jitsu, few were as pure, technical, and respected as Cobrinha versus Rafa Mendes. For years, these two defined what competition looked like at the highest level. Almost every major final in their division came down to one of them, and every time they stepped on the mats together, fans knew they were about to witness something special. Cobrinha, the veteran, built his name on relentless pressure, unmatched cardio, and a style that wore down opponents over time. He wasn't flashy, but he was precise, disciplined, and suffocating. Rafa, on the other hand, represented the new generation. He brought barimbalos, inverted guards, and an evolving arsenal of techniques that pushed the boundaries of what jiu-jitsu could look like. Their matches were the meeting point of two philosophies. What made this rivalry so captivating wasn't trash talk or drama. It was respect. Every match was razor close, often decided by a single sweep or the smallest positional exchange. Fans tuned in not to see animosity, but to see who could solve the puzzle better this time. And both men rose to the occasion. Cobrinha pushed Rafa to sharpen his techniques, and Rafa forced Cobrinha to adapt to the changing landscape of modern guard play. Together, they elevated featherweight jiu-jitsu into something that inspired a whole generation of lighter grapplers. In the bigger picture, Cobrinha versus Rafa Mendes was a rivalry that left the sport better than it found it. Instead of dividing fans, it united them in appreciation for technical mastery and high-level competition. It reminded everyone that rivalries don't always have to be bitter. Sometimes, they can be about two greats pushing each other to new heights. Now that we've gone through some of the most legendary rivalries in jiu-jitsu history, I want to hear from you. Which rivalry do you think was the greatest of all time? Let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more breakdowns just like this.